Hello and good morning. Happy Monday. I'm going to go ahead and get this conversation and webinar started, just to be mindful of everyone's time and potential question and answers that we'll have at the end of this. So my name is Courtney Thomas. I am the HR Director and Mental Health Policy at NextGen Policy, and we are thrilled to work in concert with our partners at CalNonprofits and the California State Library to do a 1-hour webinar to go over the highlight of our California State Grant Portal. It's housed on the California State Library website, which are one of our guest features and discussion leaders will be disclosing and discussing later. But first off, I want to do a brief land acknowledgement. The history of the Sacramento area and the people is really rich in heritage, culture, and tradition. The area was and still is the tribal land of the Nisenan people. So Sacramento was a gathering place for many local tribes who've lived throughout the Central Valley and the foothills for generations, and were the original stewards of this land. So we'd like to acknowledge the Southern Maidu people to the north, the Valley, the Plains Miwok peoples to the south of the American River, and the Patwa and Wet'suwet'en peoples to the west of the Sacramento River. We would also like to honor the Wilton Rancheria, the only federally recognized tribe in Sacramento County. So we want to give land acknowledgement of those who have used and stewarded this land previously and prior to us. A couple of notes as we move forward through this webinar. We will be, as you all are aware, recording this webinar, and it will be available after the fact. So all of you who have signed up, and if you've been able to share this information with any of your colleagues or fellow community members, you'll be able to find the webinar in its entirety. Also, most importantly, is that throughout the course of this discussion, please feel free to put any questions that you might have in the chat. And there's going to be a question and answer period led by myself and one of our guest speakers, Shivani, towards the end of this discussion, so we can hopefully answer any questions that you might have if they haven't already been open or answered throughout the course of this webinar. So with that, I'd like to introduce our two speakers for this webinar this morning. First off is Shivani Valrelli. She's the Grants Information Act Project Manager for the California State Library. She's led a team to build a tool that provides a centralized location for grant seekers to find California state grant opportunities and for state grant makers to submit the information. And she will be providing the bulk of the information and the tools and tips and best resources for this webinar. And then next up is Jan Masako. She's the CEO of CalNonprofits. So the California Association of Nonprofits is a statewide membership organization that brings nonprofits together to advocate for a variety of communities. Jan's a leading writer and thinking on nonprofit organizations with a particular emphasis on board of directors, business planning, and the role of nonprofits in society. She's written books, founded and written for the Blue Avocado magazine, and has been a tireless advocate for volunteerism. So just, the goal of this webinar, like I mentioned, and hopefully from our quick blurb, is that this webinar is set to inform you, instruct, and provide resources to all of you so that for whether it's individually or within your respective nonprofits or again, communities, you're able to use the resources that are available to you from the state of California. And we found that not a lot of people knew about this resource and or didn't know how to navigate it successfully. So that's what this conversation is hopefully going to provide to everybody. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jan, and she's going to, connect and discuss how important the grants portal is. Thank you.
This portal is a wonderful resource. I'm so glad to see so many people here to learn more about how to use it. I just wanted to point out that this kind of resource for nonprofits doesn't just happen. It's not like somebody thinks of something and it just happens. And that this really came about with a couple of things that are really important. One is that it was advocacy. So we at CalNonprofits, we sponsored this bill. We worked with the author on this bill. We rounded up people to support it, including making calls and letters to members of the California legislature. So this is what advocacy is about, is something like this happening. And the second thing is it takes friends. It takes friends in the legislature like Monique Limon, who was the author of this bill. And in addition, she founded the Assembly Committee and then the Senate Committee on the nonprofit sector. So she's a real leader for nonprofits, real champion. And she herself has a nonprofit background, as increasingly people in the legislature have. So just remember that this didn't just happen. This is about advocacy and about having friends. So keeping that in mind as we go forward. So second thing I wanted to say is, you know what, if you want, I'm going to go on later and say a little bit about some of the other portals around the country, like the federal grants portal, for example. And I want you to just realize what a great job the California State Library has done. I mean, when you see it, you'll see this is like nice, this is friendly, this is usable. I get it, this is intuitive. And I just want to really tip our hats to all the folks at the State Library for really doing their homework, really doing a great job. And that's perfect, of course, way to introduce the star at the State Library, and that's Shivani. So Shivani, take it away.
Thank you, Jan. I really appreciate your introduction and your kudos to the State Library. I also want to take a moment to thank NextGen for bringing me onto this webinar and sharing this resource with all of you. And hopefully this resource is going to be useful for your communities and for yourselves to be able to utilize and find grants in the state. So with that, I'm going to share my screen so we can actually walk through the tool and the website that is built and see how it works. So give me one sec. Okay, so this is grants.ca.gov. So again, it is not the federal grants.gov, which a lot of you probably already use, but this is for the state of California. It is driven by legislation, as Jan mentioned. It requires state agencies to enter all competitive grants, including federal assistance, loans, and first come, first serve. So it has loans in there, but you can filter that stuff out. This is the homepage. You can actually find the opportunities by going to different areas, like, for example, filling out this sentence, I am, and then you can select the type of applicant you are. So if you're a nonprofit, you're a public agency, which includes local government, K-12, higher education, special districts. So if you are public agency or nonprofit or an individual, I will note that there are not many individual grants here. However, state agencies do enter some individual grants that are available for individuals to apply for arts, for example, and those will be listed under that individual category if the state agencies are providing that. The information on the grants portal is entered by state agencies at a periodic time. They are required to put the grants at the same time they go live on their website. So again, you can select the top applicant type. You can select out of the categories. There's 19 categories here. You can select, they're very high level for a reason that we don't want your experience to be where you're clicking multiple layers of categories. So I'll show you how to filter a little bit better as we move forward through this. But you can select any of the categories. You can select underserved communities, disaster prevention relief, environment and water. Many of you mentioned in your survey, you're looking for libraries and arts type of grants, or climate change, which will go under environment and water. Okay, so you can select any categories. If you're a nonprofit or your public agency does not want any application deadlines to be approaching like in a month or very soon, you can select the time frame of the deadline here. So this is all driven through the data that is entered by the state agencies. So you can say, I want to see grant opportunities until the application deadline's like in 6 months or something like that. So you could click 6 months. Once you've selected all of the filters, you just say, show me the opportunities. It goes through the inventory and pulls out the grants that are related to the categories and or applicant type and the time frame if you selected it to show you those opportunities. Or you can see everything that's on this portal by saying, show me everything. Another way to get to the inventory is by selecting a category, more visually appealing way to finding what you're looking for, or the applicant type. And you can also see our recently posted grants here. So this tells you state agencies are entering this data periodically and as it become available for everyone to apply. Here's a little statistical background. There are 170 grants that are open or forecasted, and we'll go over the definition of forecasted in a minute. There are 11 that were added in past week, and there's 15 billion currently available funding on this portal. Okay. So if, let's say, I want to see everything and I want to do advanced filter, for those of you who are, looking for doing keyword search and such. So you'll go up here, find grants, or you can do show me everything. It takes you to the same place. We're going to do find grants. It drops me to this page. As you can see, there are 170 grants on bottom. You can select keyword search. The keyword search, there's a tooltip on the corner to tell you what type of keyword search. If the keyword that you entered is mentioned in the title or in any type of text in a grant, it will pull the results from that search. So for example, if I do high school or higher education, for example, and you hit apply filter or enter, there's currently a grant that is listed for higher education. It has higher education mentioned somewhere in this grant. Doesn't mean that it's going to apply to what you're looking for, but it pulls out everything possible so that you don't miss something that could be potentially useful for your organization, right? And so you can look into this grant a little bit more by clicking on more info. If you don't want to go away from this page, you can read about who's eligible for it, what's the purpose of this, and what is some of the geographic limitations that are put out by the department. It will also tell you opportunity type. That's how you know it's not a loan, it's a grant. If you are interested in looking in more in depth, you can click on it and it'll take you to a detail page where you can read all the information about funding, available, estimated available funding, all sorts of dates. And then if you're really eligible for this, you can hit the grant guideline, which will take you to the department's website. We do not host application on our site, so you still have to follow the process that the agencies or departments have set. Okay, so you hit grant guidelines, it takes you to their page and you can apply for a grant through their process. One thing I will note, per the legislation, all grants have a resource of who to contact in case you have questions about the grant. Departments are required to provide a phone number or an email address. Therefore, you can see that there's, sometimes name even associated with it. So you can contact this person regarding this grant if you have questions. Okay. Going back to search, a couple other ways to search. If you are doing keyword, let's say you do climate change, and then you select category environment and water because that's what climate change is going to be under. You can select an agency if you are aware of a department name that you've either applied for in the past or heard. You can select the department. You can look for a department and it will pull up everything related to forest, right? So if you don't know the real name, you can find it by just typing within the agency. You can again select eligible applicants. So if you're a nonprofit, disbursement method, I want to get a reimbursement, so I'll select that. And if I don't want to see loans, so I'm going to select do not show loan opportunities. So once I've selected all my filters, you can save this refinement in your browser. So what does that mean? It means that once you click on this little button here, it's going to save. It's always going to search for climate change in the keyword. It's going to search for forecasted active loan. It's going to exclude loan opportunities and any agency, and it's going to select category environment, water, and I'm a nonprofit and reimbursement grant only. And if I said yes, save my search, it's going to drop a browser cookie in your browser. So next time you come here, it's going to already recognize and search for this criteria that you saved. You can always change the criteria. You can change it and save a new cookie if you like, or clear your cookies and then come back and re-enter a new search, results that you would like to see. So that's a quick way to not having to come back to this site all the time and look for grants that you're not going to look for anything else. If you hit apply here, it will come up with all the criteria that I put up here, just keeping that in mind, and there's a result for all of them. So there's a bunch of grants. So let's talk about what is forecasted. As you can see, forecasted doesn't have a deadline, right? As this one forecasted right here does not have a deadline. Forecasted grants are those that are planning purposes only. They are on the discretion of the department, meaning departments can decide to put the grants out as a way to give you a heads up that this grant might open up in the future. How do you know when it's going to open up? As you can see, open date here. This is the anticipated open date, meaning that's when they anticipate it's going to open up for applications. So forecasted are not open application grants yet, but you can track them, right? If you think that you might be interested or eligible for the grant. And you can actually sign up for our subscription, which will give you, on top, it says subscribe, give you a form where you can get a daily or a weekly digest of grant opportunities in the categories you're interested, or all new grants altogether. So here you can select newest grants, which means it'll give you a digest of any new grant, regardless of the category, or you can select a category. Just know, it could be a multiple selection of a category. So a grant can be tagged with disadvantaged communities and employment, labor and training, and environment, and energy, for example. So if that happens and you selected those 3 categories to get a digest, you may get a duplicate because one grant can be tagged with multiple categories. So just note that. But you can get the digest, so you don't have to come and look for new grants on the portal. And once you've selected that, you can hit subscribe and go through the process to make sure you get those. Find grants back here. A couple other things. We have a glossary here that tells you the definition and the fields that departments are entering. We also have FAQs to help you understand the portal a little bit more. We do have select language in different languages here, driven by Google. So just know it is a Google translation. And this translation does not go forward to the department's site. It only ends at the grants.ca.gov. So it will only translate the information here on the portal. So going back here on the couple of other things about this site, you can see our statistics dashboard. Our grant data here on the portal is very transparent. We have been asked to make sure that we have a legislative annual report, which is also listed here in our annual reports, if you're interested in reading what has happened since the grants portal went live, which was July 1, 2020. So it's only been a few years that the grants portal has been live. This data gives you a sense of how many participating departments since July 1, 2020 to now. And then it gives you the dollar amounts that have been given out, right? Forecasted, active, or closed grants. This data is all open source, which means you can download a CSV through our open data portal. So that data will have everything from July 1, 2020 till now. We are planning to put out the second part of the legislation that passed in 2021, AB 132, which now requires state agencies to provide us award information, meaning now that the state agencies are required to provide us with data that who received the money, who received the grant, how much they received it, which geographic county it may be impacting the funding in, and bunch of other data elements, right? So that information has been already implemented since July 1 of 2022. So state agencies have been putting that information out. We are planning to put a dashboard out sooner in the next few months here to show that data set for the last fiscal year. So our data is open source. Anyone can come and look at that data. If you're using this site and you have questions about it, you can click on our use this site and look at our FAQ and glossary here as well. This tab here is for state agencies only, right? So it is not for anyone who's searching for grants. As Jan mentioned, this data is entered by state agencies, and they are required to come in here and they have a login. As a user of the site, you do not have to have a login. You do not have any kind of credentials. You just come here and search for the grants that you are interested in. And then you can always contact us. How do you contact us if you have questions about the grants portal? Or if you're not receiving an answer from a department that you reached out to through the resource tab? You can either email us through our mailbox, which is ca.grantsportal@library.ca.gov, or you can complete this form, and we try to respond back within 48 hours. So that's form is running 24/7. So you can come at any point and fill out the form, or you can email us in the mailbox. And we do have several blogs here that we've put out based on the needs that we've heard from our users in the past. So we have grant search tools and writing resources. So this was captured through other departments that have provided some grant writing tip tools and resources out there. So you're more than welcome to check those out. We also have some resources that are not grant related, more of a financial assistance. So during COVID, there were a small business relief fund that was for small businesses. So if you're interested in finding out more about that, there's resources there from the state agency. And then any local help, that you may be looking for as a person. So that information is here as well. So we try to do a blog just to kind of give a better sense of what's happening on the portal. Like I said, everything here is entered by the state agencies, and we have a great relationship with them to try to make sure that all the information is provided for your benefit to be able to find the grants that you're looking for. And that is all I have. I'm going to hand it back to, I believe, Jan, to kind of share more about local government and even the federal portal. So Jan, let me stop sharing this. There we go.
See any questions, which I think means that you were so crystal clear that nobody has any, but I just want to encourage people, if you do have questions, put them into the Q&A section. That would be great. Thanks, Shivani. You guys, isn't it a great portal? Okay, so I just wanted to say a couple additional thoughts. So first of all, why should nonprofits be looking for government money anyway? And just a couple of reminders. First of all, you can see this is a chart from our Steady Causes Count, and it shows that 30% of our income in the nonprofit community comes from government. And a lot of that is in health and human services. And this particular chart doesn't even include universities or hospitals. So you can see how important government funding is to all of us. Government funding can often renew for decades. Foundation funding, that would be extremely rare, for example, as well as for individual donors. Governments are often seeking to serve underserved communities, just like nonprofits are. And this is kind of a subtle one, but it's an important one. Getting government funding also involves you in kind of a community of providers. So for example, if you're a recipient of mental health services funding from the government, it can also help you. You'll get to know other people that are in that same circles and learn not just more about funding, but also about mental health services. Next slide. So in addition to Shivani's slide, I wanted Shivani's comments about the California State Grant Portal. I want to let you know about some other portals. One is the federal portal called grants.gov, and Shivani mentioned this one. And this is kind of like monster.com. It's got like so many, monster.com, it has so many jobs in it, you kind of get dizzy and feeling like, I don't know what to do with that. And that's kind of grants.gov, but it is worth knowing about and looking at. It is the opposite of user-friendly. It's hard to work with in my experience. So just to be alert to that. I will say that their resources, like how to write a government grant application, that kind of thing, are excellent. So even if you don't use it for searching for grant opportunities, those materials there are really good. And then let's look at some local portals as well. Many of the counties in California also have portals, and there's kind of two types. Next slide, please. One of them has, this is for, oh, I'm sorry, skip this one, Cali Procure. So Cali Procure is the site for seeing open contracts. Now, the thing is, in California state divides very sharply between grants, which we just saw on the grants portal, and contracts, which are seen on this portal called Cali Procure. And the thing that's confusing about it is when you get a grant, the first thing you do is sign a contract, right? So so we experience it as nonprofits as kind of always being a contract, but these are these big differences. And so Cal Procure works the same way in some ways, but it's for contracts. And here's just something I took off the website last year to just give you a sense of a lot of it is this kind of thing, right? Like isolation, room testing, office moving. But every once in a while, you'll see some nonprofit stuff show up. Next slide. And then there are county portals. And some counties, like the county of Stanislaus, has a county-wide portal. So they have one portal for all the departments, whether it's Health and Human Services or whether it's corrections or public safety. They have one portal, and you can see that here, and has some of the same search functions that you saw earlier. And this is again a screenshot from a real example of them. And then some counties are so big, unlike Stanislaus, that they have multiple portals. And if you see the next slide, you'll see an example of Los Angeles. So many of the departments in Los Angeles County have their own portals. And this is one from the Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. And you can see that they have their grant opportunities as well. So one of the things is when you're because in California, most contracts that nonprofits have are made through their counties rather than directly from the state. It's a good idea to also check with your counties. And I'm afraid there isn't an easy way to find out if your county has one portal or more than one portal, but make sure that you look at the counties that you're located in, because you're likely to find additional grants available to you there, in addition to those you can see on the state portal and the federal portals. Okay, those are my slides. And I see, Shivani, you have a question. You want to give it back to you to answer that before we give it to Courtney?
Sure, I can answer that question. So save refinement. Unfortunately, there's only that option currently available. However, like I mentioned, you can save multiple things within. So it's not just one filter, right? So you can select multiple categories. You can select multiple agencies, multiple eligible applicant type or disbursement method. So technically you can save more than one, but it's not going to have like 3 different types, right? So yeah, so unfortunately, that's all we're able to, where there's a limitation on the front end piece of it, that we can only provide dropping a cookie browser in your browser and try to help you have that save refinement piece.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jan, for your insight and your input. And Shivani, you've kind of started our questions and answer period wonderfully. So just as a quick refresher for everyone on this webinar is that I'll take a look at the questions and then be able to provide them to Shivani so she can give you as full and as cohesive answer as possible. So thank you so much for that first one. Our next question is nascent community-based organizations often don't have the technical skills or capacity to fulfill the grant application process. Are there any sources of technical support for these organizations available in state government?
There are departments who have technical assistant workshops and events that they host. So the best thing to do is, if they have entered a grant opportunity as a forecasted grant opportunity, that is where they're advertising their planned events and workshops. So keeping track of those, as well as even the active grants, right? They will have a planned event under the resource where you can actually click on and find all of their workshops that they might be hosting to provide technical assistance, whether for that grant or, other grants that they might have in their, department that are publicized. So keeping in mind that planned events is your friend to look at for any of the technical assistance workshops for state agencies.
Wonderful, thank you. And our next question is, can a business registered in Delaware, or I'm assuming any other state, apply for California grants?
That really depends on the requirements of the state agency as well, but doesn't mean it deters other states to apply. There are out-of-state grant opportunities that, as long as there might be requirements like, it impacts California in some way or form, that kind of thing. So I would highly encourage you to read the RFP very carefully and the description and the purpose to ensure that you are eligible to apply prior to moving forward and submitting your application. And I'm not sure if Jan has any input on, from her as perspective as well.
Oh, Jan, you're muted. Come back to us. Thank you.
State departments sometimes have workshops and manuals and stuff like that. Many of the counties do as well. And they're typically done by department. And they're often done around a particular grant. So for example, they're called bidders, sometimes they're called bidders conferences. So for example, many times a county will say, put out an RFP, a request for proposals, RFP, and say, let's say it's for supportive services to people that are in homeless shelters, let's just say. And then they'll sometimes say, well, we're going to have a bidders conference on such and such a date and time, which is usually a Zoom meeting in which they go over it and let people ask questions about it, which is very helpful. But again, you have to kind of look on the site to see if that grant opportunity exists, and then sign up for the corresponding technical assistance workshop.
Thank you so much, Jan. We do have a question in the chat regarding the direct link. And so I just want to clarify for all of our webinar attendees that at the very end, we'll have a whole slide that will provide links to both CalNonprofit, NextGen Policy, California State Library, and the portal in our respective emails. So we'll make sure to provide that information to you. But thank you for that. And while we're waiting for some more questions, Shivani, if you want to talk about the importance of closed grants and why people should kind of look into that and be engaged in that process, that'd be really great.
Sure. Let me share my screen again so I can walk you through actually what I mean by closed grants and what they look like. Okay, so if you are an organization who has not applied for a grant prior to this webinar and looking for grants, and you may not find something in your keyword search or your filter. Again, like I mentioned, the grants are added periodically, and there might be chances that sometimes you may not find a grant in your category and or keyword search. Don't be disappointed. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It may exist. So how do you find out and confirm that? By selecting closed grant. So here it's going to default to always have forecasted and active, because we want to give you opportunity to find the more open grants or upcoming grants, right? But you can always click on the closed grants, because what that does is it shows you what inventory has been in the past from the state agencies. And some of those grants are annual grants, which means if the budget funding passes next year, those departments might be putting those grants back out. So if you're interested in that, you can put a keyword search or you can put a category. I just clicked on close so you can see everything that is on the portal. So close, obviously it's going to be in red. It's going to tell you what was the date of the deadline in the past, but it gives you a better sense of type of grants. So for example, this one is by state treasurer's office, and if you hit more info, it tells you a grant or loan, right? So it gives you a better sense of what type of grant it is, the purpose that it was, or you can actually read the full details of the grant. So the description is where you get most of the requirements written out by the state agencies. So that's where you really want to make sure, who's eligible for it, what type of exemptions and or restrictions there are. And then again, eligible applicant type, nonprofit, public agency, right? So that kind of gives you a better sense of like, this grant existed in the past. It may come back next year, right? So you want to make sure you can keep track of it. So that's what the closed grants are really. There's inventory, and we do not take them off from the site. So which means the entirety of the inventory has been there since 2020, and it will be for now. We don't have any retention policy at this point or archiving per se.
That is really helpful. Thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to just leave open our question opportunity just for a little bit longer, so that if you have any questions or anything, and really no question is not too large or too small for us to answer. Just we want to make sure that we provide you all the updates and information that works best. So we're going to keep this open a little bit before we close the webinar, but just want to provide that opportunity for folks. If you have a question, then you're curious about any of the and not just about the grants portal that Shivani has discussed, but any of the slides that Jan has presented today. If there's any questions, then feel free to throw that into our chat and we can keep having this conversation. Okay, we have a couple more questions. Thank you everyone for participating. So our next question is, if we select more than one grant category, will it bring up all opportunities under any of those categories or only opportunities that fit under all categories simultaneously?
Great question. So it will select, if you selected multiple categories, it will pull up grants under all those categories. So for example, if I selected disaster prevention relief and education, if the state agency selected both of those for the grant that they put out, it will pull up all grants that are related to disaster prevention relief and education, right? It's not and or, so it's and. So that's a great question.
Wonderful. Then our next one is, are these the same grants you would find on a subscription site?
Thinking about that. There are several for-profit companies that have subscription sites to federal, state, various counties, various categories. And most, what I would say is that they're all using the same databases. So they don't have some hidden ones that you don't know of that are not otherwise available to you. A lot of them have a 7-day trial period, and then they go on to charge you something like $40, $50 a month to be able to continue to see it. So if you see those on a Google search, I would suggest that you sign up for the 7-day free period, but then put it on your calendar so that you unsubscribe to it in time before you start getting charged.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. I think these are the questions that we've gotten, and we really appreciate your engagement and your participation in this webinar. I think we're going to wrap this up. On your screen here is the links that you could just click on and provide direct emails to either myself or Jan or Shivani. You can also at the bottom, find your grants opportunity at grants.ca.gov. And then, as I mentioned earlier, this recording of this webinar will be shared via our NextGen Policy YouTube and our page, along with CalNonprofits and Cal State Library. So we really appreciate all of your time and engagement and questions. I'm happy to see that you all are going to share with your people and organizations in your community. That's really the big reason and point of this dialogue and conversation, is that this information is shared and, within your communities, within your fellow nonprofiters and individuals, so that the access to these funds is used so that we can kind of create and build and move towards a better collective. So thank you again so much for all of your participation and engagement. I'd like to really appreciate our two guest speakers, Jana, Shivani. Really appreciate your time and engagement, and thank you so much, and have a good rest of your day.